Welcome back to another installment of this month's very special 31 Days of Halloween, where I will be taking a look at the films of the amazing Felissa Rose. Today's review is going to be a little bit unusual for a number of reasons. First off, it's one of the few films that I've actually already seen before, and not only that, but it's one that I've actually already posted a review for in my Month in Horror podcast, which I've kind of taken a break from to work on other stuff at the moment. So I have actually reviewed today's film for that already, just a few months back, so it's kind of interesting to see how my opinion of this film has changed. That film is from, of course, 2021, the film Cold-Blooded Killers, written and directed by Mr. Rickey Bird Jr. and starring Felissa Rose, Dave Sheridan and Caroline Williams. Before we even get into plot, there's a little bit of a kind of elephant in the room here, which is, of course, the fact that this isn't 100% a horror film. In actual fact, it's almost 0% a horror film, and it's more just this kind of basic swearing and guns action film with kind of slightly exploitation-y twist to it. It kind of occupies the same sort of territory as something like maybe Joe Lynch's Everly, or something a little bit weirder like Violet and Daisy or Sushi Girl, or one of those films, in that it's got a kind of violent post-Tarantino-y feel to it, where everything is kind of very stylized and very violent and very sweary. I was debating about whether or not to actually include this, but the thing is, the IMDB still has got it listed as a horror film, which is sort of an excuse, I have to admit, but really what it all comes down to is more the fact that this is the 31 Days of Felissa Rose, and this is very much a film that really does give you an awful lot of Felissa for your money. And seeing as how we've talked about horror films where Felissa Rose has just got a cameo, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about a kind of non-horror film where Felissa Rose is playing a full-on starring role. I'll get this out of the way right now. This one has definitely got a Felissa factor of 9 out of 10 because she is all over this one. Main character, loads of scenes, lots to do, and I'd go so far as to say that it might be the most screen time that Felissa Rose has ever actually had in any film. If you really want to see a proper 100% Felissa Rose film, then Cold-Blooded Killers is one that you'll definitely want to check out. It's also a chance to see her do a lot of stuff that you wouldn't maybe normally expect to see her do, but again, we'll get there in just a minute. First off, the basic kind of plot idea of this one is that we've got a story of this group of hired killers who are all competing for bounties, which are organised via the help of this revolutionary new kill app. And believe me, it's not really as lame as that sounds. It actually does kind of make a little bit of sense. The biggest target of all is, of course, our tough-as-nails killer Rose, played by Felissa Rose herself, and when somebody kidnaps her sister, Rose goes hunting for the fuckers that took her, and finds herself evading this kind of constant stream of hired guns around every corner, this kind of group of eccentric, kind of deadly killers who want that top prize. There's a lot of hidden motivations that will be revealed over the course of the story. It's essentially a road movie full of, as I said, guns and swearing. I think that my general kind of memory of Cold-Blooded Killers was that it was very cheap, tacky, badly made, but it had this kind of fun vibe to some of it. But the general feeling that I had in my mind was actually that it was a film that was trying hard to be really cool, but actually just looked kind of cheap and shoddy. Now, I don't know what's changed, but I don't mind telling you that watching it for a second time, I actually enjoyed Cold-Blooded Killers more than I can objectively justify. I think that the key was that I was actually looking forward to it for a second time, actually. See, the first time around, the thing that really drew me in and got me wanting to watch it was because it stars as Felissa Rose's sidekick, somebody who's probably my favourite actress currently working in the genre right now, and that is, of course, Caroline Williams of Texas Chainsaw 2 and many other things. The thing is that the first time that I watched Cold-Blooded Killers, I was at a point where Felissa Rose was one of those people who I kind of knew the name of, but who I probably couldn't name 5 films that she'd been in. So it's interesting now that I've dived so deep into her filmography and come to kind of look out for her in any film, that I was now this time watching Cold-Blooded Killers for Felissa Rose, and that kind of evened the playing field out a little bit, because it meant that both of the stars were actually people that I really had a lot of time for, and what I got from it this time was that real sense of having these two iconic figures team up, and just getting a chance to really kind of enjoy these contrasting performances, you know, their chemistry, and just the cool kind of horror icon energy that you get in the scenes that they've got together. One of the best things about Cold-Blooded Killers, or actually two of the best things about Cold-Blooded Killers, are that Felissa Rose gets tons to do, and also the fact that she spends most of the film teamed up with Caroline Williams, which is really the stuff that you want to see. That's the stuff where it all really clicks, and it's at its most enjoyable. The thing is that there's loads of films that make use of people like Felissa Rose in a very minor way. Really, she's not had that many huge starring roles. And Felissa Rose has always seemed like somebody who tends to get smaller parts that let her stand out and kind of be an asset to maybe a lower budgeted film without ever really getting that chance to be absolutely all important to it. It's nice to finally get to see her headlining a film, especially considering the role of action hero seems such a departure for her, and by no means an obvious fit for somebody like Felissa Rose. One of the real treats of Cold-Blooded Killers, the fact that Felissa Rose is actually surprisingly quite legit as this gun-toting badass in disco pants. She's absolutely no less likely than any one of her male counterparts of a similar age. To be honest, there's actually something that's quite nicely subversive, not in that really knowing, cynical, shitty way, but something that's genuinely quite nicely subversive about the sight of Felissa Rose in action hero mode that kind of helps Cold-Blooded Killers to have just enough camp to it that helps you to accept it for something that's fun and frothy, as opposed to something that's deliberately trying hard to be all macho and gritty and full of cheap tough guy bullshit. There's something about Felissa Rose and Caroline Williams teaming up to take on this kind of army of mercenaries that's just, at its heart, something that I really want to see, and I think that if the idea of that isn't something that's fundamentally going to click with you, then Cold-Blooded Killers is probably not a film that's going to work for you. I admit that a lot of my enjoyment comes from the fact that I basically just like what Rickey Bird is selling me. The plot is basically just a string of violent set pieces bouncing from one thing to the next. Some of them are actually fairly decently well thought out, others are a little bit shoddier. But there is actually, surprisingly, a story that's got some degree of fairly well thought out reveals buried into it, which is something that I think that I appreciated more the second time around. Basically, it moves along quickly enough that you're allowed to enjoy one bloody scrape after another, whilst enjoying seeing Felissa and Caroline Williams being awesome. I admit, as well, that when our two heroines are off-screen, things really do slow down quite a lot, and I think that if you recast, then I would definitely lose interest in this film. It's just that rare bit of really spot-on casting that doesn't feel like this cheap kind of Expendables type thing of, look, we've got these famous actors where star power is all that you've got. Felissa Rose has worked with a lot of great people throughout her career, but there's something about her and Caroline Williams together that really just gels. You can totally believe in their friendship, you really feel that they're a lot deeper than the film itself, and you really want this film to just be their characters taking on the world, because it's just such a one-in-a-million piece of perfect casting that has landed these two such compatible actresses with one another. Weirdly though, it would seem that the person that we need to thank for that is actually Felissa Rose herself. Ain't that weird? But the thing is, even though there's quite a few names along for the ride, a lot of Felissa Rose regulars like Thomas Haley, Vincent Ward, Brink Stevens, Cold-Blooded Killers marks for me what I consider a very rare, poor performance from one of Felissa Rose's most regular collaborators, who is Mr. Dave Sheridan, who plays the main baddie in this. It's not just the fact that his character's look is pretty appalling, I think that he really just does overact quite badly, and he falls into a lot of kind of very theatrical kind of crap villain tropes, which is strange, because I really do like Dave Sheridan, as I've been saying the last few days, but I just think that his few comedic touches in this seem very out of place, and this character is written as this kind of crude, one-dimensional type person that just doesn't really let somebody with Dave Sheridan's talent for these kind of quirky, likeable performances have any room to breathe. It doesn't help that his character's a complete cunt either. A lot of the other performances are definitely on the amateurish side. The general kind of level of conviction on display isn't great. The action kind of tends to be more ideas than the visuals. A lot of the kind of shootouts are fairly poorly shot and feature quite a lot of cheap looking CGI muzzle flashes and various other kind of slightly wonky effects. However, there is this kind of general stylishness to quite a lot of the wide shots and the framing that I think keeps the whole thing feeling slick, even if I think that Rickey Bird isn't the best at editing action scenes in a way that actually helps them move. I mean, I could go into more details, but the thing is that I think if you kind of know what you're getting yourself in for, then Cold-Blooded Killers is a film that does have a certain charm to it, absolutely, because it puts two very charismatic character actresses at the heart of this very unlikely, slightly ludicrous action film, and relies on us being impressed with a pair of middle-aged, tough-as-nails horror icons fucking shit up. And there's something that's just so kind of irresistibly, unexplainably exciting about that idea that just kind of really speaks to me. I mean, I tend to think that most action films are silly anyway, so I don't necessarily have problems with suspending my disbelief enough to accept that Felissa Rose is a super assassin, and to her credit, she does actually sell the illusion as well as I think she possibly can. I think the costume designs in this are good. I think most of the characters are designed in such a way that they've got a slightly kind of 90s, too edgy by half, kind of maybe something like an Image Comics kind of look to them, where every character's absolutely got a look that they stick to. It's a general kind of comic booky vibe to the whole thing that I think is quite nice and helps the characters work more as sort of iconic images rather than just being cheap cliches. But, you know, after watching a load of cheap films, I do not have a problem with the general kind of cheapness of Cold-Blooded Killers, and I actually think that this film looks quite sharp for its budget. What I've got more of a problem with is just that really kind of generic, shitty rock music that's dropped over just about every scene without fail. I just find that kind of stuff monotonous, flat, and quite annoying, to be honest. I'm not sure what a great soundtrack would bring out of Cold-Blooded Killers, but I've always believed that with the right musical score, any film can kind of really spring to life, and unfortunately, this is very much a film that's just got a really crappy, uninspired, bog-standard barrage of just rocky kind of noise thrown over the whole thing. It's just not for me, thanks. Really, though, I think that my biggest problem is that every time that Felissa Rose and Caroline Williams are off screen, it's just time that's wasted that I could spend in the company of a pair of really irresistible screen legends. I mean, there's so many times that you'll just get, horror icons brought together into the same film, just doing kind of little bits and pieces, and you never get the chance to really enjoy that feeling of a real kind of connection that's being made between two great seasoned horror veterans. Because a lot of the time what happens is there's budget problems that mean that the name actors don't get used as much as they should, but it does fundamentally use its stars to their best. Believe it or not, and it's counter to the way that the media wants you to think, but the best actors are people that have actually been about for long enough to master their craft, which means that letting Cold-Blooded Killers actually be about its heroines first and foremost means that we actually get a higher standard of acting than a lot of films of a similar budget would usually show us. Think of something like maybe Zombie Killers or Death House, where we get a couple of horror stars, but most of the screen time is spent with younger, less experienced actors who are just naturally less charismatic and convincing at what they do just because they don't have that whole history behind them. See, the last time that I reviewed Cold-Blooded Killers, I singled out a lot of kind of technical problems, which are things that I didn't think worked in it so well. I could nitpick this one a lot, but this time around, all I want to do is celebrate just kind of how much fun I thought that central dynamic was, and even though on an objective level, I can see that it is a flawed film, I can't deny that I did have a really fun time rewatching this, and I don't mind admitting that in a few months' time, I could probably happily watch this film again, and I think that counts for a lot. My previous rating for this was actually, I think, a 3.5 out of 10. Now I think that objectively, that probably seems about right. It is a pretty shoddy piece of work in general, but knowing what to expect and just getting a chance to enjoy a film that's got so much Felissa Rose in it, and she's having so much fun trying out doing kind of action hero stuff, I think that in terms of sheer enjoyment, I'm actually happy to give Cold-Blooded Killers a 6 out of 10 just for this once. Whatever problems I do have with it are outweighed at the end of the day by the fact that it is just silly, slightly campy fun, and that it's a film that understands that charisma is something that you just can't put a price on, and a film that finally manages to get great value for money out of Felissa Rose by giving her a chance to actually become this very unlikely but very entertaining action heroine. So I think we'll cut this one short here. That should do us for another day of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose, a look at the amazing Cold-Blooded Killers. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you have, please let me know what you thought. Give us a cheeky little comment, a like, whatever, and while you're doing that, I shall be busy pumping out tomorrow's video for day number 24 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. Please check it out, and I shall see you back here for that tomorrow. See you then, alright?